In today's episode, we turn our attention to one of the most pressing issues in education, the rapid rise of artificial intelligence in the classroom. Schools are experimenting with AI-powered EdTech, and in doing so, they're becoming testing grounds for AI services. AI has the promise of reducing teacher workloads, personalizing learning, and giving students more means to express themselves. But alongside these potential benefits lie serious questions around children's rights, their freedom of expression, their privacy and inclusion, and their protection from commercial exploitation. Welcome to this episode of the European Schoolnet Podcast series. This is the second episode of the Agile Edu project, which explores key factors in meaningful and ethical use of data in education. My name is Antoine Selim-Bilgin, and in today's episode, we will take a look at a recent, very interesting report titled A Child Rights Audit on Gen AI in EdTech. And I have the great opportunity to discuss this report when it just came out, and with two of the authors, Ayça Atabey and Sonia Livingstone, from the Digital Futures for Children Center. So Ayça, Sonia, thank you for joining me today.
A pleasure. Thank you for inviting us.
So to give our listeners some context, Sonia, could you tell us a bit about the Digital Futures for Children Center and perhaps what motivated you to do this research and to write this report?
Sure. So Digital Futures for Children is an effort to really bring together evidence and policy and advocacy. So many things are changing in children's digital lives. So many things are changing in society as it responds to big tech, all kinds of tech entering our lives in so many ways. And a lot of the debate, especially when it comes to children, is quite heated and sometimes quite anxious and not always firmly grounded in evidence. And so our centre is a pairing between the London School of Economics and Political Science, which is a social science university, and the Child Rights Foundation, which is an advocacy organisation promoting children's rights in relation to policy and practice. And it's that pairing that is really important for us. So we've been working together for a few years, first on the Digital Futures Commission, and trying to bring both an evidence base and a child rights approach to all of these transformations in children's lives. And you might ask why a child rights approach, and it's not that everyone does that, but we have been working ever since the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child produced its general comment on children's rights in the digital environment. We've been kind of taking that authoritative statement as our framework, something that we can point governments to say, here is the authoritative vision of what good looks like for children in a digital world, and something that also bridges the principles of trying to do the right thing and the very practical tools that are needed for teachers, for educators, for ministries of education, for everyone to kind of know, how do we make children's rights real at a time of really rapid transformation. And maybe the last thing I'll say about our centre at this point is we began looking at children's lives across a range of different areas, because their rights includes everything. And somehow we felt that the ways in which technology is entering the school is a little bit under the radar. And I know it's not under the radar for those listening to European Schoolnet podcast, but so much of the debates are about how children use tech in their leisure time, what the responsibility is of their parents, their social media activities with their friends, the kind of personal risks that they encounter through their chosen tech. And we felt that what happens in school is really crucial, because children don't get the choice there. They are given the tech they're given. They all must use it for it to be effective in the classroom. We can't have people all making different kinds of choices. And it's bringing about a very kind of rapid transformation in the school in ways that we wanted to better understand. And that's where we formulated, in a way, a very simple research question, which is, what does good look like for tech in the classroom?
Thank you. And I find that your child rights framework in the report is quite aligned with their pedagogical needs as well. So I find it very interesting, and it is a timely report. We see the anxiety reflected in the debate on screen time, mobile phone use in schools as well. So perhaps,
just to add on that point, I mean, the advantage of a child rights approach, apart from addressing government in an authoritative way, is that it's child-centered. So it sees the issues through the eyes of the child and the experiences of the child, and it also tries to be holistic. So, that's where we really wanted to see schools are a place for education. They're also a place for the development of social life and identity. They're important social spaces. But tech brings in the commercial interests, and it brings in the datafication of learning in ways that poses real issues for privacy. And we wanted to keep all of those different rights, on the same page, because they're all connected.
Perhaps we can also take a look at the process. Ayça, maybe you could take us through the report. How did you choose these tools? I think you did an audit on, it was a series of 5 case studies. Mm-hmm. Could you tell a bit how you carried out your investigation?
Sure. Well, first, we wanted to understand what Gen AI tools are used in schools. When we started our research in December 2024. And back then, and still is, so there is not much publicly available evidence. We didn't find much. And this is because public authorities published no official list, which was quite challenging, to be honest. But then we consulted educators, policymakers, EdTech experts about the use of these tools in schools and at home. And also, as well as educational benefits, harms, and any good practices that we could find, and to check whether our initial selection of Gen AI tools reflected the reality they observed also in educational settings, both at home and in school. So after the choice, after consulting different stakeholders, we used the mixed social-legal methods, so including product walkthroughs, policy analysis, I would say here lots of policy evaluation of data and privacy policies, and consultations that I mentioned with stakeholders, including children, educators, experts around the world. And then we did evaluate these digital tools about how they operate, and we did assess claims they make. And referring back to what Sonia mentioned, these assessments, we conducted these in light of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child and the Committee on the Rights of the Child's General Comment 25 regarding the digital environment, which is our guiding light at the Digital Futures for Children Center in everything, in all research that we do. And then we looked at, with that light, we looked at how these tools uphold child rights, including right to education, privacy, protection from commercial exploitation, and many more.
This reminds me, you used an app, an extension to do some of the tests. I think it was called Ghostly.
Yeah.
I also installed it, by the way. So you use that as well, right?
Yes, exactly. When we did the product walkthroughs, maybe on that point, which was quite interesting to me as well, finding the right tool was so difficult. We consulted so many privacy engineers, DPO, data protection officers, lawyers, because they should be looking at these a little bit. But unfortunately, there is no, and this includes Ghostly as well. There is no tool that captures all the tracking and all data, data processing activities. And we did try a couple of more tools, which are listed in our report, but Ghostly was the most comprehensive one.
And
Sonia, do you want to say something?
I was just going to add on the question of methods of how we went about the report. I think you can hear from what I just said, it kind of wasn't obvious at the start. How does one do a child rights audit of any kind of digital tool, but thinking of EdTech here. And so we have over the last few years evolved a kind of multidisciplinary team. So, I think it kind of matters that I was trained as a psychologist and Ayça is a privacy lawyer, and we've worked with those with educational expertise and a range of different kinds of social science and legal expertise, and just working out how to put that together. How do we bring the privacy policies of a product together with what is being told to us about the realities in the classroom, and then how does that relate to what we see in on the kind of statute books, what the legal framework is, and so just finding the right tools, finding which methods would tell the kind of clearest story. That's been I think working out the method has been a contribution in its own right, but I think Ayça will tell you something of the findings, which is exciting.
Yeah, Ayça, could you tell us about the findings, maybe something that is striking at the first glance, and maybe some common points across the 5 tools?
So the first one I'm thinking is the privacy violations, like opaque and unfair data practices that we found in all 5 tools. So that was definitely a common one. So commercial tracking, for example, tools like Magic School AI or Microsoft Copilot, Grammarly, all of them expose children to commercial trackers. And this is what we found, using Ghostry and using other methods as well. And shockingly, some even from adult content advertisers. That was something that I personally was not expecting when we started this research. And lack of transparency, there is very little or even no clarity about what happens to children's data. Fabricated and misleading data practices, this is specific to Gen AI especially. So most of the challenges that we see here are the things that we have been seeing, unfortunately, for some time now in the context of EdTech. But this fabrication and misleading data practices is quite new in the context of Gen AI. That is worth mentioning. And many tools have tracking and data sharing enabled by default, so no opt-in. So these are some examples. So the first one is privacy. The second one, I would say, maybe actually I should have said this first because it is, I think, the most important, is the exclusion of children's voices in design and governance. So all tools excluded children's perspectives in their design, governance, and evaluation, evaluating the benefits. And so as a result, we found that design features I'm talking about here were often misaligned with children's real world needs. And I want to highlight this especially for those diverse backgrounds and children with disabilities. There is not much, not at all, with some exceptions. So we need to hear from children. And I think third one is really, really important as well, and common across 5 tools, is insufficient safeguards and lack of remedy mechanisms. So tools provide we found that some tools provide unsafe, misleading, and inappropriate content. And we found that there's no meaningful safeguards or accessible redress mechanisms for children, which is extremely, extremely concerning. And for those who are interested, they can read the report. But for me, these are the most striking ones. And maybe Sonia, do you want to add anything?
Well, I think one question that is really coming to the fore in our work is the reason that these tools are introduced in the classroom in the first place, which is the right to education, or the idea that they will benefit education. And we've really been thinking increasingly, what does that mean? Because all the tools come with superlative claims about how they're going to enhance learning and creativity and personalized education, offer such wonderful opportunities. But really, finding any evidence to support these claims was, there just wasn't not very much evidence at all. And so that raises in my mind 2 questions, which is, one is, do these tools really bring benefits for learning? And how do we demonstrate it if they do, because there they are in the classroom? And then the other is, how do we weigh the benefits for learning against the risks of harm and privacy invasion that Ayça has just mentioned? And, somewhere in that is the idea of the best interests of the child, which should be taken into account to, in the real world, to kind of recognize that maybe the tools bring benefits and harms. How do we, obviously the better idea would be to design the tools so that they bring benefits and no harms, and also to think about the design of the classroom so that the school is able to make use of these tools in a way that is with benefits and without the harms. So, that idea that all the rights are indivisible really becomes very pressing when what we have is tools which risk children's privacy, make them open to commercial exploitation, and yet cannot really establish that there is an educational benefit.
I remember a claim in the report. I'm not sure which tool it was. It might be Grammarly, but they were claiming that it reduces cognitive burden, cognitive load for children when they're writing, because it gives corrective feedback. But I was wondering, what's the evidence on cognitive load being an issue, or could even be beneficial to have some cognitive load to have some deeper learning? So I am not sure where their claims come from or where it is based. But yeah, that grabbed my attention. The idea, the claim that cognitive load is something bad and that it should be reduced through AI tools.
Ayça, do you want to focus on Grammarly? I mean, maybe I'll just say on cognitive load. Isn't that an interesting one? Of course, education is about children having to put in effort to learn, and learning is effortful, as we all know. So it's a question of balance. What we see in other research, not necessarily to do with technology at all, is how much pressure children are finding our education systems in general, and how much they are reporting in relation to their mental health. That it is the pressure to learn, the pressure to get results, the pressure to compete, that kind of individual demand on their achievement that is really problematic. That's why I kind of referred to, in a way, can we think again about the design of the classroom and the school, and not always think it's the tech that can solve the problem that somehow society is creating.
Thank you so much, Sonia. Maybe I could add to what Sonia said. I think in terms of maybe first answering, in terms of evidence, we have not found much. And this claim was not only Grammarly, there were other tools, I think Magic School AI as well, making those, claims. So we see this claim quite, in different tech tools. But what I want to highlight here is that they're and this is the benefit, and this is why child rights approach is amazing, the holistic approach it brings. Because when we look at other for example, risks such as Grammarly's AI detection can negatively impact trust with teachers, or privacy violations or risks actually making children really stressed. So when we take into account different components, actually when we weigh benefits and risks, the picture is not that clear, it's not as claimed. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but I quite like the holistic approach here, and questioning again those benefits, that claim that you mentioned, Antoine.
So you also mentioned in the report that students don't have the means or a channel to report when there's an issue. And then I also remember that some plagiarism detection features are also not quite accurate. Could you maybe tell us a bit more about those 2 points?
Shall I go, Sonia? Yeah. Yes, definitely not. And to be very honest, because this report has been quite a few months, it took a few months, and until the last month, like even in August, I was checking whether Grammarly or other tools, they changed their claims, because it is so obvious that these tools are not accurate. It's everywhere. And we also talk about this in the report. And no, they still claim it. And this is really shocking to me. And we really need to think about, it's not to blame anyone about your tool is not accurate, but it's about really what this can mean for a child, and the relationships between teachers, even parents, teachers, students. There's a lot to think about there, and it's beyond accuracy.
I think we all find ourselves beginning to kind of outsource our judgment a little bit. Grammarly says that the child has cheated. The next thing that happens is that the teacher accuses the child, and the child is having to defend themselves. And this is a challenge in the classroom, because it creates a kind of a conflict where there should be cooperation, but also the evidence is opaque. How does a child defend themselves when an AI tool has declared that it's cheated by comparing what they wrote with what is out there in the rest of the online world? So it creates these kind of puzzles where everyone is sort of put second to the authority of the tech, when it should be the teacher with the authority and the child with the rights to be explained to and to explain themselves.
To disperse the gloom a bit, we can also focus on the benefits, maybe, or the potential benefits. So you pointed out some challenges, some issues, but perhaps you also came upon potential benefits of these tools. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
In the report, we also do recognize that actually these tools can bring, some benefits if they're designed properly, if they're compliant with the laws. So some potential benefits, tools like Grammarly, we just talked about the negative aspect, but the positive aspect is, or Microsoft Copilot as well, can adapt explanations. They can give tailored feedback, provide extra support, especially in language learning. There's evidence that this is actually useful, helpful. That can be helpful for children, especially who do struggle with writing, who have, for example, learning disabilities, ADHD, dyslexia, or who are learning English as an additional language. So there's, in terms of accessibility as well, a good example that I really, really like is from the report is Mind's Eye from Smartbox Technologies. It's a Gen AI tool that can be combined with other assistive technologies like eye tracking, predictive text, so children with disabilities can create artwork digitally. I think that's about more than convenience. It's about giving children who might otherwise be excluded a way to express themselves, and so giving them a way to participate in learning in a different way. On the teacher side, we found some good practices and positive testimonials from teachers. For example, Magic School AI. It can be time saver, according to some teacher testimonials, generating lesson plan, quizzes, summaries. Lastly, there is a creativity, voice, and expression one. So some children are already using chatbots to brainstorm ideas, role play scenarios, or draft stories. So when done well, that can actually really support enhance freedom of expression, which is good. And if designed in compliance with the law, as I did mention, for example, we do mention quite a lot data protection law, it can provide children with a space to try things out and without compromising their rights. So lastly, I want to say, I really want to stress the benefits are mostly claims. So I did mention some evidence, but usually, as Sonia mentioned, these are claims. So we need much stronger evidence. We need independent evidence, independent research-based evidence, especially for younger kids and marginalized groups, vulnerable groups of children, and all children. So the potential is there, I would say. The key is whether those who develop those technologies and schools prioritize children's rights when they bring these tools into classrooms. So the bottom line is, like, Gen AI or AI in EdTech is not like good or bad, but we know that it's really powerful. And, whether it empowers children or undermine their rights really will depend on how we design and regulate these technologies, I would say.
There is also another type of technology feature that's giving human-like responses, or empathy emulators. So I was wondering what is meant by human-like responses triggering engagement?
Well, I think this is, children are often the pioneers in exploring what is the kind of latest experimental tech and exciting tech. And I think for them, the way in which generative AI seems to be like talking to a person, a smart person, a kind person, a person who has all the time in the world for them. This is very enticing and certainly seems a lot more fun to explore and play with than a kind of an old-fashioned Q&A or reading text and providing your answers and then seeing if you got them right or not. So the way in which generative AI, as it were, presents itself as if it's a friend is getting an enormous amount of publicity right now in the public domain, and it has benefits for, or it could have benefits for learners, because we learn interactively. We learn through engagement. That's the fundamental. We learn through others responding to what we say, and then we respond and on it goes. But at the same time, the potential for manipulation is enormous, and that's what's really in the headlines at the moment. I'm part of various kinds of debates, so I see the debate around safety and whether children should even have access to this kinds of Gen AI, because it's inaccessible. How the companies are creating the models in ways that could manipulate, could deceive, could be dangerous. And yet I also hear in the kind of mental health space many mental health practitioners who are really excited by the way in which something like character AI, or they could build a mental health bot that would guide and support a lonely child or a child who doesn't know where to get help. And the tech would be personalized, scalable, and could translate really significant forms of expertise in a way that could be accessible to so many children. So I can kind of see what is exciting. I think the risks are very much at the forefront of many minds at the moment. And then at heart is a question which is about whether tech should present itself as human in the first place. So I think there are some pretty profound questions now that we need to ask. When we began this work, we were being told, but is there generative AI even in the classroom? And how do we even know it's there? And then we began talking to children, and they said, of course, we use this, we use that. It's got a little, it's become embedded in the apps that we use. So my point is, adults are still debating whether children should have access to this, and children are already using it. And yet again, we've kind of got it the wrong way around.
Yeah, now we're trying to catch up.
Yeah.
What I wondered also, well, the benefits, the potential for mental health support is there. But I was wondering if these are a support for some practice of social interaction for later real life social interactions, or maybe, chatbots are just too convenient, and a child that uses them will less seek for social interactions in real life. Even when I'm using generative AI to maybe pitch some ideas and generate some ideas, I find myself thinking maybe in the past I would have gone to my colleague to talk about this, and that would have created some social interaction and some networking between us. And now we don't have that anymore. So maybe that's also a question to think about.
Absolutely. And I think there is always this kind of double design question of how is the app designed to solve a problem, if we have that problem, but also how is our society designed that kind of creates that problem. So is it the case that we no longer have the opportunity to talk to a colleague, or that children no longer have the opportunity to talk to the friend? And in some ways it is. We all work from home much more. Children are kept at home much more, less able, and Europe, different parts of Europe really vary in this. But, you know, through the whole of human history, I think every society has always known that the way you bring up a child is through social interaction that responds to the child and scaffolds what it is they want to know and the questions they ask and how they can develop. And that absolutely should be our priority, rather than taking that away and then building tech to fill the gap, which in any case, we have no evidence that it does.
I'd like to revisit the term digital native, because the Digital Futures for Children Center published recently another report on children's voice in the global south. And there I found some quotes from children very interesting. Some seem to be quite aware. Children around the age of 10, 12, quite aware of the risks of using artificial intelligence. So I was wondering if those are the exceptions, or are children more aware of artificial intelligence related issues?
We're proud of the report that just came out, because we worked with researchers in Brazil, in India, in Thailand, and in Kenya, and we really wanted to get a sense of how Gen AI is being used by children or engaged with by children in different parts of the world. So, as you say, yes, we were in many ways surprised and kind of stimulated by the way children knew about Gen AI. It is there in their apps that they use every day. They are exploring and experimenting in ways that they don't always tell their parents or teachers. They are talking about it among themselves. You know, have you seen? Have you tried? You know, what happens when? You know, that kind of experimental mode of learning is very natural to them. But at the same time, there are so many things they don't know, and there are so many things that so for example, the question of the commercial companies behind this technology, indeed the complexity of the tech that makes Gen AI possible. These are things that they don't know, and don't know how to find out about, because the opportunity is not there in their environment. So I think from the point of view of listening to children, I think we should be a little cautious, because we also got a very strong story of inequalities. So there were probably, you know, we interviewed more urban children, or maybe children who said, yes, I can talk about Gen AI. So we don't claim to be representative of those countries. And there are many children who lack access to tech in the way that they could freely experiment with it, of course. But the digital native rhetoric, perhaps, maybe its grain of truth is that children are kind of born with the curiosity for this, and they have the confidence. And the problem with it is that it somehow implies that they can just be left to get on with it, and society doesn't need to provide. And of course, society absolutely needs to provide both AI literacy, or digital literacy, or digital education, to guide children and help them understand and so forth. But it also needs to provide some regulatory limits, because there are limits to what teachers can make space for in the classroom?
Yes, maybe very in terms of inequalities and especially accessibility. When we think about non-discrimination, when we conducted the research in the UK, we also wanted to be as representative as possible, and also take into account vulnerabilities of children. We did talk to children with disabilities, complex needs, which was completely another experience, and their experiences are so different and they must be heard. But this is something is very much lacking at the moment in the research field as well, I would say.
And I'd like to return to something you said earlier, Ayça, about by default, the tracking of students being on. So all the tools seem to not perform so well in basic privacy by design principles, like having the opt-out button not very visible as well. But maybe outside of this report even, are there any examples of good practices by EdTech that you could tell us?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. That's a really good, it's a really hard question. So when we did consult experts, we heard some names. But I don't think it would be accurate or possible to say that their practices are ethical or their claims, are met without really auditing these tools, like we did for the 5 specific GenAI tools. The potential is out there, perhaps, but we need to hear from children. We need to have evidence about the benefits and ethical data practices. And also, I want to highlight that this doesn't really mean that it doesn't exist. Well, it can exist, but we looked a lot and we couldn't find any. And because you did mention data protection and privacy, I can very confidently say in that aspect, because we didn't include all the tools that we looked into in the report. But like many tools, all the tools that we looked into, they failed to comply with these laws. So yeah, sorry, I don't have good examples from here, but maybe lessons to learn. Maybe Sonia, do you want to add anything? No.
I think it's actually a puzzle. Why so many products that see an enormous educational market and claim compliance with data protection law, which now is kind of well established. Why it is that we still see these kind of data leaks and data going to commercial companies, they using the data that they take in the classroom as sort of research and development for their own products, which is a reuse, which is a problem and a kind of commercialization of childhood. And then the data is also, as we could see through Ghostery or through other tools that we've tried, the data is in various ways being made available to the whole data ecosystem, which is ad driven, which is heavily commercial. And perhaps it's not surprising, we are, there's always been a relationship between public schools and commercial products. I mean, actually, the publishing industry for textbooks and so on was always commercial, but didn't kind of open this door to the commercial ecosystem in the way that tech now does. But from the point of view of the complexity of these tools and the way they come packaged, with "this is good for you" kind of written on them, and how it works completely not stated, or very difficult to interpret, or buried in multiple complex data privacy policies. One can see that from the school's point of view, this is just very kind of hard to navigate. So I don't think we want the report to come over as in any way blaming schools for not kind of understanding or not managing the technology that they're bringing in. They have to bring it in. That's what modern education looks like. They're being sold many benefits and they're not being told about the risks. And that's really where we wanted to shed light so that we could make some more informed decisions for schools and with schools.
We also, thank you. We also talked about earlier pedagogical benefits not being always clear. This is a topic that came up often in the workshops we had in the Agile Edu project. And I think you also mentioned this in the past, Sonia, that EdTech needs to have some evidence-based standards, or we could have some certification for the pedagogical values and standards. What do you think could those look like? Is it some standards for working with educators to develop them, some testing guidelines? It could be anything, but Sonia, Ayça, if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, I might start even on standards for evidence, because it is very striking that how many claims about evidence-based tech abound. So what is evidence? Okay, the first thing we would want to see really is that evidence should be independent. Companies hiring experts, even wonderful experts, but hiring them in ways that they control the message and they control which results are made public is not adequate. That I think to spend enormous amounts of Ministry of Education budgets on tech that is rolled out across all our schools, there has to be independent evidence. In other areas of education, there's always been a kind of gold standard of the randomized controlled trial. You compare the classroom with the educational resource and without, or you compare before and after, and you make an independent assessment and people look, was it a big effect? Was it a small effect? How do you weigh it against the cost of the product? We've done this for how many children per teacher. We've done this for, does this textbook work, or is this curriculum effective, or what assessment method? We're not doing it for tech, for EdTech, and it's a puzzle. Then what does good look, assuming we have the evidence, how should it be used is the kind of second part of your question. And there is some interesting politics between schools wanting to make their own decisions. They know their community, they know their goals and their principles, and they want to choose their kind of particular array of technology that serves their pedagogic and other goals. So that's their kind of a sense of flexibility and agency that they need. But on the other hand, we're talking about an enormously complex and fast expanding kind of array of EdTech possibilities, often managed by very large and powerful companies that don't always negotiate the details with each school. And at that point, it seems the guidance and the independent view must come from the government or from independent agencies. So if the regulator or the Ministry of Education, the government, set minimum standards for EdTech so that the schools weren't left with the entire marketplace, but they could kind of choose with the worst cases already weeded out, and alerted to knowing what to look for and how to tailor the available options to their particular needs. So much of it comes down to guidance and to procurement rules, actually. And procurement is never the kind of the most exciting topic, but actually really it's the critical segue between a marketplace and an education system. Ayça, want to add on, and what some of those standards and minimum standards should be, we've also been thinking about a lot in our work. Well, we came up with a list of 10 minimum standards, and they have some similarities to the age-appropriate, or they kind of link with the age-appropriate design code, which is part of UK law, but fits with European data protection standards also, I mean, is at heart is in the general data protection regulation. So yes, standards in terms of transparency of what is on offer, high standard of data protection for children's right to privacy by design and by default. They should be safe. So there should not be a data transfer from the classroom to adult content sites, for example. And independent evidence of educational outcomes, benefits, and perhaps something we've been thinking about also around kind of trusted data infrastructure, because we've always been exercised by the fact that commerce is using children's data for its commercial purposes, but in the public sector, it's actually very hard to use children's data for public purposes or indeed to benefit children, because it's, public agencies tend to be more respectful of data protection, dare I say. Companies will contest this, of course, but we put it out as a provocation that there could. I mean, many are working, and I know that Agile EDU is also, really exercised of whether there can be rights-respecting ways of better using education data for public and children's benefit. I think the goal is an excellent one. Achieving it remains very challenging.
So, Ayça, I was wondering, the audit, the 5 tools did not perform so well with the audit, but is there anything policymakers can do to incentivize EdTech companies to adhere more to, child rights by design principles?
Thank you for the question. Well, child rights by design and also principles that you mentioned, they're more to guide it out there. But in terms of when we talk about compliance, perhaps it might be better to talk about, for example, privacy regulations or data protection regulations, and which are very much interlinked with child rights by design anyways. What I would say, none of the tools we audited were in that context. So I will come to Age Appropriate Design Code that Sonia mentioned. The UK's Age Appropriate Design Code is actually a very strong framework, and the guidance is there, I would say. And the companies, they must be complying with the data protection laws, and they should be complying with the code, especially in the education space. What is great about the code, I think, is the code is informed by the independent and also fantastic research Sonia led and other colleagues from the centers such as Maria Stoylova, they did with children. So it's a great code. It is backed up and informed by the research. And I think it is the most concrete piece of law in the context of data protection that concerns children. So what is really missing, the guidance is there, but what is really missing is compliance and stronger enforcement, I would say. And also even basic measures like turning off, tracking by default, or providing child-friendly explanations like privacy policies. They are already in the law. They're musts. And they're easy starting points, I think, that could be scaled quickly. That could be scaled quickly. And honestly, I think maybe the last thing that I would like to say here is that I think we need to be a little bit more skeptical. So if a company claims to be compliant with the laws, so we should be asking, really, can you show us how? I'm saying this because what we found in the report, the gaps between the claims and the reality were often quite shocking. Sonia, I don't know if you want to add anything.
You'd like to
add? So we did a survey in the UK a couple of years ago asking children, does anyone talk to you about the tech in the classroom? Do you know what data it's collecting? Do you, is it okay for the data to go to commercial companies and so forth? And children are clear. Nobody talks to them. They don't want their data going to companies. And if something goes wrong, they have no idea what they can do about it. And at that point, I do think we have disempowered a generation of children by not explaining to them. But I know that many parents and teachers from our research also find it very hard to kind of pause and ask questions to explain why are we using this tech or how is this really benefiting. So I think sometimes tech is considered a kind of an expert debate for experts to make decisions and sort out. But actually the public is involved and it touches everyone. And when the tech goes home with the child to do their homework, what happens at home is somehow brought into that ecosystem too. So, people want to understand better and they want to know what to do when things go wrong. And I think everyone is beginning, like you said, children are beginning to become quite thoughtful about even the generative AI that they're using. And that means we do need to have a public debate, perhaps, about what we think good looks like. Is our vision of the classroom in 5 years that children sit in rows with their headphones on and a little AI indicator telling the teacher how they feel and everyone on their personalized learning course? Or is our vision of the classroom one where people sit around and they talk and they learn together and they collaborate? And maybe the tech can enable that, but the direction of travel seems more and more tech that supports personalized, individualized, earphones on kinds of learning.
Yeah, indeed. And I was also even surprised at Mind's Eye. It's an interesting tool. What surprised me is so far, EdTech seems to always try to reach a wider audience, as wide as possible, while here they are developing a service that is for a maybe smaller group of students with different needs. So maybe that's an interesting change for me, at least.
Mm-hmm.
But indeed, there are different ways of thinking of education and learning, and perhaps EdTech is now focusing too much on the personalized learning and individual learning paradigm, but perhaps eventually we'll have some wider tools and features out there. This wasn't an easy question to answer, Ayça, Sonia, to think about practical steps and recommendations. But this will be my final question. Are there any other simple practical steps that policymakers can take to make AI tools serving children's best interests more? And maybe any last words?
Well, I'll start while Ayça reflects. The world of child rights offers one tool, and I do sometimes think it is the one tool that is the answer to everything, which is the methodology of a child rights impact assessment. And a child rights impact assessment should be undertaken before a change is made in the world rather than after, when it's too late. And it should be undertaken both by public authorities and by companies. So I would say if in that flow of product development and marketing and companies had a point at which they said, hang on, have we done a child rights impact assessment? Have we thought about what this is going to mean for children's education, inclusion, privacy, safety, participation, and so forth? That's the learning moment, and it should come before the product is put out in the market rather than after. And policymakers similarly, they should, in fact, in this very thorny area, they should also be making a best interests determination. As you say, they are responsible for the best interests of the child, but that too can be, achieved with a child rights impact assessment by the Ministry of Education. I know that a lot of the tech was rolled out very rapidly during the pandemic, and that has kind of reset our educational expectations. But that speed was too fast to anticipate the consequences, and now is a really good moment to reset and rethink.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Ayça?
Yeah, maybe in addition to everything Sonia said, which I fully agree, especially child rights impact assessment made me think of the data protection impact assessments and how it is extremely important to do it before, definitely ex ante, but also while using. So definitely not afterwards, but while also the technology is being used and periodically. For example, every 6 months, every 3 months, this is what is being requested currently at the university level, for example, in the UK. So I think the same approach should be definitely adopted in the context of child rights impact assessment. So before, during, frequently as much as possible. So I think this is something quite key. And another thing is that and this should be made practical. There are ways, methods to involve children more. Sonia has decades of research. For example, there are many methods there, but we really need to listen to children more. And I think policymakers also, they need to listen to children more. So they need to involve stakeholders, children. I think there is some work definitely going in that direction, but it's not enough at all. And this really, I think, will impact the guidance documents that they publish for EdTech sector as well. So listening to different stakeholders, producing more guidance about the laws or about how things work in practice, and making those more accessible to everyone, to teachers, to children, to young people who are interested to read, and to EdTech sector as well. I think this is what I would, in practical, what I would say.
Thank you. And thanks to the Digital Futures for Children Center for making children's voice more visible to us, more audible to us as well. For example, I recommend people to check out the Global South report, as well as this report we talked about today, the Child Rights Audit on Gen AI in EdTech. So thank you very much for this conversation, Ayça, Sonia.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I hope we can do this again another time.
Yeah.
So before closing, I'm going to mention a few things. So this was the second episode of the Agile Edu project. We will have another episode, one more, which will be about data-informed decision-making in schools. If you're interested in the topic that we discussed today, I recommend that you check out the project website. We will put it in the description. We release a series of case studies that are around this similar topics, like AI use in schools as well as data use in EdTech. If you'd like to learn more, if you're interested in innovation topics around education, technology use in education, please make sure to subscribe to our channels, wherever you get your podcast on. If you'd like to follow us in general, European Schoolnet's work, you can track us on social media, and you can also subscribe to our newsletter. Thank you very much for listening today, and we'll see you next time.